Hello. My name is Reese, and today we are chatting about ethics of the future. How can we care about each other and the planet? But first, a reminder that this is part of Root, and Root is an organization and a school that I help lead that helps society understand our root level systems to help us find a route forward. And if you're interested in this, you can join a Root Fellowship, which is a community of world-class systems thinkers looking to understand and build the future. We do cohorts every couple of months, and to join an upcoming one, check out root.co. Before I begin, as always, a reminder, I hope you're doing well, person out there on the internet who's viewing this. Hi. Okay, we're chatting about Bentoism, and we are chatting about our final piece here. We've already given an introduction to it. We've chatted about how in the past and how ethics have evolved to our now me focus of today. And now we're going to chat about the future and how we can zoom out and care about each other and the planet. Let's go. So we're going to chat about stakeholder capitalism, other ways to zoom out from now me, how other movements have embodied the Bento, doing the Bento for yourself, and then just checking and saying, why do people do bad things? Is it all ethics or is there more there? Okay, starting with stakeholder capitalism. So we chat about in last time the shareholder capitalism and how that started with neoliberalism in 1970 and Milton Friedman saying the only responsibility of business is to increase its profits. And now, though, we're kind of rejecting that shareholder capitalism and moving towards this idea of stakeholder capitalism, where we care about all stakeholders. And like all things, this is, we're talking about stakeholder capitalism, and that is just an example of mostly the markets piece of how Lessig manifests our more holistic mindset. So now that we're moving to a more future us inclusive mindset, that will be manifest in a variety of things, like some of our laws and norms and code, but it will also be manifest in our markets. And so stakeholder capitalism starts to show that. So it's a shift from a now me focus to a more general focus. And it's been hip recently. In 2020, there have been these three big statements by the Business Roundtable, the Davos Manifesto from the World Economic Forum, and then BlackRock, their CEO, BlackRock is the biggest financial asset manager on earth. And all these folks are saying, hey, we got to do more stakeholder capitalism and less shareholder capitalism. These are just statements, but it starts to show some of this movement that's beginning to happen. There's a lot of other movements that are in this bucket that we can understand. One is, this PPP, caring about planet, people, and profit. So having a triple bottom line. As you can tell with this is just caring about, the planet, future us, people, now us, and also profit, now me, making sure that the company still survives. There's also this thing called ESGs, which are environmental, social, and governance. That's when there are metrics to determine whether a company is doing good at these things. And so planet maps onto environmental, future us, and people maps onto social, which is now us. The governance piece is kind of a meta piece about how you're being transparent and non-corrupt. Then there are these things called B corporations or public benefit corporations, and they're all about this double bottom line, where in addition to having they're a new kind of corporation. So there's a C corporation, a normal corporation, and then a public benefit corporation. In addition to having its single bottom line of profit maximization, it also has it adds this other bottom line of purpose and what the purpose of the company is. So for someone like Patagonia, they have a purpose statement which says, hey, our goal is to live on a beautiful planet. And so any science that we create or any awesome new material, if it is actually going to be helpful for the planet and climate change, we are going to open source that and not patent it. So that's an example of how in a traditional setting, Patagonia would be required to, and everybody would say, we got to profit maximize, keep this patented. But in this public benefit corporation world, they're allowed to say, we have this other purpose towards the planet. And so let's care about that too. Then you have co-ops or cooperatives and these platform cooperatives. And the idea behind a co-op is that it decentralizes governance and ownership. So instead of having, for something like Facebook, perhaps, especially at the beginning, all the ownership, or an easier example is Uber and Airbnb. And those are these examples of these new platform co-ops that we want to have, but are not yet currently. So something like Airbnb is owned entirely by the investors and the founders, and also to some extent the employees. And that's cool, but it's sad because Airbnb actually wants to give its hosts ownership and governance abilities in the company. And they've asked the SEC to do this, and the SEC says no. But the desire with co-ops and platform co-ops is to start to decentralize governance and ownership. So all of these things are examples of stakeholder capitalism and can be explained with Bento language. As we shift to stakeholder capitalism, they're all attempts, and something like ESGs is really an attempt at, okay, how can we do this new age accounting of, a holistic bento? What does it mean to be good for future us? And this is just a reminder, we call this, from a paradigm sense, we call this normal science, where once this crazy thing happens, like, Einstein determining the theory of relativity, then you need to do a lot of science, like get the correct numbers and stuff there. There's like the first big jump, and then you do like a lot of like detail work. And similarly, when we flip a bit at the top level to change from a single focus of now me towards a holistic focus, that big shift will then have a lot of normal science to be done after that. And so we're still determining how to do that. And something like accounting is going to be where a lot of this happens. So accounting has changed a lot over the years. And here's this funny example of an accounting statement from 1919 with Procter & Gamble. This is their year-end statement. They say, hey, we made, we had revenues of $193 million. We made $7 million. And by the way, if you want more information, you can come in person to our office in Cincinnati. So this, compared to our current statement, which are very, very long, very, very transparent, you don't have to come to their office in person to find out what's going on. So accounting will just be all the accounting that needs to happen in stakeholder capitalism and in a more holistic bento will be very interesting, and there's lots of juicy space there. As an example, I tweeted this out recently. I said ESG, this, environmental social governance, it's still very nascent. Divestment as an idea, which is where you don't invest in a certain thing, something that's bad, it started in, the 1970s with apartheid, where people were like, let's not give money to apartheid folks. And then triple bottom line as a thing was just coined very recently in 1998. This thing called SASB, which is the Sustainability and Accounting Standards Board. Sounds boring, is boring. But it's cool. It started in 2011, and it is essentially doing all the normal science for ESGs. And so its first standards, they just came out with standards in 2018, so very recently. And Etsy did its first SASB tax filing in 2019. So we're just at the beginning of using ESGs in this way, and just at the beginning of doing normal science and accounting for this new stakeholder capitalism world. As a final note here, we are transitioning into this cool new world where right now 20% of all money is invested in these exclusionary funds, where you say, I'm not going to give it to oil or tobacco or whatever. And then another 20% is in these ESG funds. But it's just going to get we're going to get better at doing ESG stuff. All of this is connected to these crucial ideas here of like, what is good versus what is valuable, and also how do you capture that value? And this comes when a lot of folks are skeptical of something like ESGs, and they're like, those are just, how are we going to make metrics for this crazy new world? And they're worried about stuff like greenwashing and whatever. And so I want to kind of differentiate the good versus the valuable versus, value creation and capture here. So what is good? I think the beautiful thing here is that society can change what is good, and then companies can start to provide value for that. So for example, as we switch to this more holistic bento, we'll start making money off of this more holistic bento. Like money can be made off of future us. For example, on the right side here, in 2014, there's a table of, what was the cheapest energy generation technology by country. And in 2014, almost all of the countries were with coal and gas, only a couple with wind. But then in 2019, wow, so many folks had gotten better and better at doing wind and solar. And now it just makes more sense to do wind and solar. You can make more money over there. People want it. There's more room for innovation, etc. And so you can make money doing things in a more holistic Bento way as we all start to determine, oh, what is good? Great. The companies can provide that new good thing for us and make money at it. This, on the left one here, it's the sale of cigarettes per day, where it shows, hey, as we determined that we didn't like cigarettes as much and that they were bad for our future me, well, of course, there was some pushback at the beginning from the tobacco companies, just like pushback from the fossil fuels companies, because they want to survive and need to survive. But we have started to switch to this other version of reality, and we can, and those folks are like making less money. So we can change what we determine as good, and then companies can respond. Yeah, so this, like in the end, we want everything to meet human needs. We want everything to be like what is good for us. And it's just, sometimes it gets messed up with like what is valuable. So it's like, oh, what is good, or just give this example. What is good might be, user value on something like Facebook. Like if I spend some time on Facebook and I'm hanging out with my friends, like that's awesome. That's real value. But then the symbol, or like at the signal level, what happens is something like time on site. How much time are you spending on there? And if you start to optimize for time on site, then you get, waking up in the morning addicted to your phones, and that's then makes you a little bit less sad. So it gets a little bit decoupled from this underlying desire for, just providing human value and meeting human needs. This is what people call Goodhart's law, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So if you measure people on the number of nails made, for example, you might get thousands of tiny nails. You're like, I don't want that. But if you measure on the weight of nails made, you might just get a few giant heavy nails. So similarly with Facebook, if you measure with time on site, instead of like value given to person, social connections created or whatever, you're just going to get people really optimizing for time on site, therefore addicting users, therefore getting as much data as possible. So in addition to that, we can think about, there's that distinction between what is good and what is valuable from a symbols and reality perspective. And then there's this difference between the value you create versus the value you capture. So even if you create something that is valuable, can you actually capture that value? I just want to remind us of this fat protocols idea, or rather this thin protocols idea, where on the internet, man, there are these protocols at the bottom, like TCP/IP, which really has created so much value for people, but there's no way for them to capture that value. While on the applications layer, something like Gmail, which is built on top of TCP/IP or built on top of SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, they get to capture all the value. And so this is just a reminder that value capture or value creation is not the same as value capture, and that sometimes value created can be a lot more than value captured. And it can be hard to determine how to capture that value. This is, and then going back to like the signaling piece, if you are trying to make money, if you're this business and you're trying to make money, you're supporting your now me profit needs by providing value for people on the right. So now me is from the company perspective, the left Bento is from the company perspective, and the right Bento is from the human perspective. And it's like, okay, you're a company, you're doing your now me stuff, making lots of money by providing value for people. Amazing. But what can happen is, as we talked about with the Facebook example, sometimes the symbolic of making lots of money, can get decoupled from the real. And that's sad, and that's why something like purpose is a thing that people talk so much about within the stakeholder capitalism space, or another way to say it is this idea of shared value, where if you're Facebook and you have this really deep sense of purpose, where you just want to help people connect with each other, then when you're symbolic, when the money you're making gets decoupled from the real, if that does happen, you say, oh, wait a second, we have this purpose. Let's go back to that purpose and really make sure we're not addicting people, we're not stealing people's data, whatever. Let's connect our purpose to make sure that we can connect our symbolic to our real and use our purpose as a way to connect those things. And this is very connected to this idea that some folks will call shared value, where you want it to be the case where as a company, you're making money, value for yourself, by actually creating value for others. So this double thank you of capitalism is beautiful when it happens, but when the symbolic and the real get decoupled, then it doesn't work. And purpose is a great way to make sure you're still doing the right thing. This is very connected to the iron law of woke capitalism, where, and this is from an Atlantic piece where the author, she says, brands will gravitate towards low-cost, high-noise signals as a substitute for genuine reform to ensure their survival. Right? If you're a company, it's very easy to signal wokeness, to say, Black Lives Matter, or hashtag Me Too as well. But then what about the reality there? How are you actually helping your people? And so this is, I think, epitomized by the statement, you can do woke capitalism, but it's hard to do anti-capitalist capitalism, right? If you are saying, hey, we're a company and we are really good post-capitalists or anti-capitalists, we are, let's say, paying our employees 2x more, like an actual above living wage. That's harder to do because it's so much more, the signal that you get from it, it's so much easier to just do something that has a high signal while actually being less, less bad for your company. And so this idea of signals versus reality, it really comes up a lot with these things like greenwashing as well, where you can be a woke capitalist and you can also be a greenwashed company where you say, we're doing a really good job, but actually we're not actually being good for the environment. Or something like virtue signaling falls into this bucket too, where you're signaling, I'm such a good person, but it's actually not having much of an impact. A thing that I think is really sad here, by the way, is that we don't have a term for the opposite of this. What is it? What do we call a company that instead of greenwashing is actually just being a really good company? It's like green doing or green impact or whatever. What should we call something like that? We don't have a term for it. The final note here is around this book called Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. And I did a podcast with him if you want to check it out. And the idea behind this book is that, you have these companies that are signaling, we're doing so good. And they're also signaling, and then we also give all this money to people. But actually, they're being bad for society. And you can see this with on the left. This is what they start with at the beginning, where the company, they're signaling to folks, their symbols are, we're helping people so much, blah, blah, blah. We're Facebook, connecting the world. Sorry to rag on Facebook so much. It's just the example of the day. Versus the reality is they're just making tons of money. And then after they make that money, then someone like Mark Zuckerberg then gets to say, man, now I can help everybody so much. I have all this money and I'm going to give it and make all these hospitals and schools and stuff and signal that I'm being a good person. But in reality, he might not be doing as good. He just has a really big foundation with a lot of money that gives away some of it per year. 5% is the requirement. And this brings up a question of, how should one do this? Should someone like, Mark Zuckerberg, or a restaurant or whatever, they could at the beginning just pay their employees more, and then if they pay their employees more, they're now us, being cognizant of now us, and then later they might not have as much money and so they can't give back. Or should they just hyper optimize for profits, paying their employees as low of a wage as possible, and then afterwards, give back from a philanthropic perspective? I'm not sure which one is correct here. And it gets confused because so much of the signals versus reality get kind of messed up as well. So, this is, and this was especially true, by the way, in the 1900s, where you had railroad barons who were not charging their people, who were being really bad to their employees, and they were trying to stop unions and stuff like that. And that was bad. And then on the other end, they were like being nice Carnegies and were creating libraries and stuff like that. Okay. So what does stakeholder capitalism feel like in your body? Part of me is excited and part of me is uninterested in some of the deeper level accounting stuff, even though I know it's so important. I also, whenever there's a signals versus reality piece, it's just hard. It's really, I just want things to be as tightly coupled as possible. So I get sad. Okay, interactive time. How can we ensure businesses actually do good while being aware of their greenwashing? Like, doing good is good. Trying to be virtuous is good. Trying to be green is good. But how do we make sure they actually are doing that without just doing the washing side? Second question, should companies treat their employees better or give more of their profits to charity? Okay, let's look at how we're zooming out beyond now me, and specifically, that stakeholder capitalism was looking at how companies as an institution are kind of being more Bento-ish generally by doing stakeholder capitalism. And now we're going to look at just specifically, future us and now us and future me and how we're thinking about those in society now. Okay, let's start with future us. The idea behind future us is that, we have 8 billion humans alive today, which is cool, but we've had 100 billion total throughout all of Homo sapiens from, 200,000 BC or whatever. And there's going to be a lot more in the future. If things go well, there's going to be quadrillions of humans in the future, so we should really care about them too. Both the ones, my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids that are soon, but also the ones way, way in the future. Like, we really don't want to kill all of human life because there's so much future life that could be amazing. This really started with the nuclear bomb in 1945. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they killed about 200,000 people. They were these massive bombs. And when it happened, or when before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but after the first nuclear bomb, Oppenheimer, who was part of the Manhattan Project, he said, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." That's this Bhagavad Gita line. And he really saw it, was like, oh boy, this is a lot. This is intense. This is a really big bomb. And similarly, there's this guy, Joseph Rotblat, who was part of this crew who, after World War II, really were trying to, they really pushed they held all these conferences to help push like nuclear non-proliferation treaties and stuff. And he got the Nobel Prize in 1995 for his work. And he said, "From my earliest days, I had a passion for science. But science, the exercise of the supreme power of the human intellect, was always linked in my mind with benefit to people. I saw science as being in harmony with humanity. I did not imagine that the second half of my life would be spent on efforts to avert a mortal danger to humanity created by science." So this was a big deal for scientists when it first came out. It was like, okay, yeah, science is great. Let's keep going. And it was like, we've now created this. What have we done? We've created this thing that could be really bad for humans. This is shown with the number of nuclear warheads. It went up primarily with the U.S. and Russia. U.S. in blue, Russia in red, to 60,000 in the 1980s, and then has gone down to about 10,000, which is good, but it's still way too many. But this is very dangerous for society and for future us. We could kill lots of people today and really hurt everybody in the future, and or if things are really, really bad, wipe out all of humanity. The environmental movement is another aspect of future us. And it started with this, or it had always been, people cared about nature, but really the modern environmental movement started with this great book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which is about DDT and about how, which is a pesticide, and about how the pesticide is actually, it can be cancerous to humans, it can kill animals in these really bad ways. It's not a good thing. And so she was like, this is really bad. We should stop doing this. And of course, the U.S. government and DuPont, the chemical agencies, they were like, no. But this was bad. So this was 1962. And then another crucial part of the environmental movement was this picture Earthrise, which is the most influential environmental photograph ever taken. That's what Time 100 said. Um, there was this guy, Stuart Brand, who was, he was giving out these, because we had just started to go to space, and he was giving out these pens that he had heard that we had a picture of Earth, and he's like, why haven't we seen a photograph of the whole Earth yet? Like, shouldn't we see a photograph of the whole Earth? And then we got it. There was one in 1968, but this real one in 1969 is the more famous one, and it's this beautiful picture here called Earthrise. And you can see it there. It's amazing. You can buy a t-shirt of it. That's us. That's this pale blue dot. And that gave us this zoom out perspective of, wow, that's us. We're on this little blue dot. That's crazy. And as a result, we got a bunch of great things. I mean, we got the environmentalist movement where in 1970, we had the first Earth Day celebration where it's like, oh my God, we're on this pale blue dot. Let's do it, people. Let's care about, the Earth. And then in the United States, and this was happening in other countries as well, we got this Environmental Protection Agency, where it's like, let's have an agency specifically designed for caring about the environment. Now we can see this mostly of the form with climate change. And, we have our scary exponential graph over here of, atmospheric CO2 concentration going up and to the right. And so there will be lots of uncertainty and heat in the future. And this is just one big externality of the Industrial Revolution and fossil fuels. Just like how nuclear, an externality of developing nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, developing a weapon to be like, oh, okay, this might be helpful in war. And then it's like, oh no, now we have way too many that could kill lots of people. We have a similar thing with climate change now. I like to think of this from the, Nature 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 perspective, where you have, Earth. Yeah, we got it. Climate change is all about caring about Nature 1.0, Earth, our substrate. It would be very difficult for humanity to continue to survive without all of the amazing Earth things that we have. And then we also have this Nature 3.0 piece of, networked AI. So let's chat about that for a second. This is AI alignment, or AI safety is what people will call this. And as a reminder, it's not about a bunch of scary robots. What it's about is optimization problems. And so the way to think about it is, just like anything, AIs will use their sense making and their knowledge. They'll do some processing, and then they'll do that to then, use energy to move atoms or bits in the world. That's how AIs do their thing. Take stuff as input, make a decision towards some kind of goal. If their goal is, and the scary thing though is like, the funny thing is, funny/scary, you can imagine a goal being make paper clips. Make a bunch of paper clips, please. And then the AI, if it is super powerful, maybe a little bit too powerful, and is, connected into this network and connected into cars and machines and all these things, well, then it starts to, and this is kind of extreme, but it could get the idea, it could start to want to take the Earth and humans and all these things and turn them into paper clips. Like, its whole goal is to be a paperclip maximizer. And so this is a little bit of a stupid example, but it does show some of the worries with this thing that we're creating. This networked AI is going to be a new, very powerful decision-making, intelligent thing, and we don't really know what it's going to look like, but if its goal is different than ours, and its values are different than ours, and we don't code it right, it could hurt lots of people or everybody. And so this is shown by the Orthogonality Thesis, is what folks call it, which is where goals of a thing are orthogonal to intelligence. So for example, just because you're a smart thing doesn't mean that your goals are good. So with this AI, just because it's intelligent, we get some super intelligent AI, that doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily, that its values will be aligned with ours. They're on different axes, unfortunately. And this is all shown with, another exponential curve of, how many, the supercomputing power that we have in society. The final one that I want to highlight here is biosecurity. We've had some natural pandemics, and in fact, we are in one right now. The Black Death was a first big one in the 1300s. It killed 70 to 75 million people, which was 10% of the global population. It's a lot. The Spanish flu in 1918 killed 50 to 100 million people, and that was 2.5 to 5% of the population. Again, a lot. COVID-19, the one that's currently happening, it's killed almost 1 million thus far, and it's likely to kill maybe 2, most folks estimate, which is about 0.1%, a little bit less than 0.1% of the population. So those are the natural pandemics, and those are scary and bad, and it could get even worse, though, with an engineered pandemic, where people, as the knowledge of biology and the cost of creating viruses goes down as we get better and better at it, and as those abilities get democratized, then you can imagine someone creating an engineered pandemic, putting it out into the world, and then that thing infecting lots and lots of people, and then starting to kill those people and perhaps killing many people on Earth or everyone on Earth. So this is shown by the exponential curve of how many genome base pairs we can sequence per dollar. And it's now, we can do a lot. So these are all shown by, there's a lot of risks to humanity in the Future Us perspective. There's this great book called The Precipice by Toby Ord, which has a table of, the chance that we die in the next 100 years from one of these things. And some of them are, non-anthropogenic, aka it's just like, natural risks like getting hit by an asteroid. And then we also have some of these ones that we could engineer ourselves, like something like unaligned artificial intelligence. Toby gives a roughly 1 in 10 chance of that killing all of humanity in the next 100 years. And so when you take all these together, the existential risk is roughly 1 in 6 in the next 100 years. And in addition to just climate change being a bad thing now, and COVID-19 being a bad thing now, it's super bad to have this high of a risk of all of human life being wiped out. And it's a sign of our immaturity with our current technology. So this is all shown by this, this is the idea of meta-existential risk, is that we as humans love getting in these arms races to create things faster and faster and more. And when we do so, we get on these exponential curves, and that's okay, but those exponential curves then become misaligned with the Earth or with our values, and that becomes very bad and could kill everybody. Okay. With that, let us chat about now us. So yeah, we've started to care more about now us in some ways. A great way to think about this is like, what things did we do 100 years ago that we see as immoral today? Like 200 years ago, stuff like slavery, it's like, oh God. And then what do we do now? Similarly, what do we do now that we'll see as immoral in 100 years? Like everybody eating factory farmed meat is like, I don't know about that. So a key thing with us, and a key thing as we've progressed in humanity, is just defining like who is us. And so, back to that original hunter-gatherer situation in Paleolithic times, it's like caring about your tribe is what mattered. And over time, we've continued to increase our circle of concern to more and more folks. And so part of that is like, us as children. We should, even though they might not be able to speak up or have less power, it's like we should have less child labor probably. And so we have had less child labor, but still have a good amount. Us can also be other marginalized folks. This is, slavery on the left, and people, that's someone's back being whipped. On the right, women's rights and those kind of things. And so us being, not just the powerful people, whoever that may be, kings or queens, but everybody, keeping everybody in mind. It's also people around the world. So this is this amazing graph of how we've done as society in the last 200 years. Looking at extreme poverty and basic education and literacy and democracy and vaccination and child mortality. And overall, things are a lot better. Extreme poverty It used to be everybody was in extreme poverty, and now almost no one is. Basic education used to be no one got a basic education. Now almost everybody does. Literacy, almost no one was able to read. Now almost everyone can. Democracy, no one was really in a democracy, and now almost half of governments are democracies. 200 years ago, no one was vaccinated, and lots of people died from all kinds of diseases. And now almost everyone is vaccinated. Child mortality, I think, is the saddest one, but the most stunning one. 200 years ago, half of kids used to die before the age of 5. So if you were a mother or father, it's just like half your kids would die. And now it's less than 5%. And so we have progressed a ton. And of course, there's still a long way to go. Still, so many kids die before the age of 5. But things have gotten better. And so when you think about now us, a crucial part of us is not just folks in your own country or city, but also folks around the world. So there are this extreme poverty number. There's about 750 million people still living in extreme poverty. And that means on less than $2 a day. And that's really hard. And really, they live sadder lives. They live more difficult lives. It's all sad. And so thinking about those folks as us as well is really crucial. Another part of us is not just humans, but also animals. So we've gotten a little bit better at this in society because I think, with stuff like zoos, like our zoos are better to their animals now. But we've also gotten a lot worse where you can see the amount of animals slaughtered for meat per year. This is from 1960 to now. It's gone up. There's now almost 70 billion chickens slaughtered for meat every year. Almost all of them are in factory farms. And so every year, there's 10 times the amount of the U.S. population of chickens being born and then killed living awful lives and then being killed in an awful way. And similarly these are less so, but are still in the hundreds of millions or billions number with pigs and cattle and other things. And so trying to find ways to care about animals as well and to not just create tons and tons of animals, put them in awful situations, and then kill them in bad ways. That would be good. Okay, a future me. Yeah, this one's an interesting one. I think less has been thought about here because the other ones are more like, how do we care about each other? There is some truth, though, to future me. I mean, we can actually care about future me now, where, 200 years ago, life expectancy was under 30 years. And so I was like, there's not really going to be a future me. But now the global life expectancy is over 70 years. And so you can think about your future self and say, what does that future self want? We start to care more about it with something like cigarettes, where we care about living longer. And so we now put this thing on a packet of cigarettes that says smoking kills, or, you show the scary lungs. You'll say, this is bad. This is a bad thing. And over time, we've then done less of it because the future me is speaking and saying, I don't think that's great. On kind of the flip side, we have a lot more folks being obese. And so it used to be, less than 10% all around the world. And now a lot of places above 20%, where we just, it's the agricultural revolution was great that we can now make so much food. But now we're eating too much food and too much salty and sweet and fatty food. And so we're getting more obese, which is one of the leading causes of death in the world. And that is sad and very sad for future me. There's a lot of exploration and kind of hip exploration around longevity research, saying, okay, we can live to 80 or maybe even 100 now. Why can't that be longer? For all of our future me's and also for all of the future us's, can't we do better at this? Why do we age? And you can see this with this graph of, this is in the United States of America, the mortality rate from infectious diseases versus non-infectious causes. And in 1900, 200 or 100 years ago, it was about 50-50 each, where infectious diseases killed half of folks, and then non-infectious stuff like heart attacks or whatever killed half of folks. But now, infectious diseases have essentially gone away. Measles, mumps, rubella, polio, all those things, they're gone. They're roughly gone. But all these non-infectious causes, heart attacks and lung cancer, we still haven't solved those. And so the question here is, how can we solve our body's aging? And how can we make our future me, propagate longer? Okay. So what does zooming out from now me feel like in your body? The main thing I'm thinking about is how to still be embodied while acting from a future me, now us, future us perspective. I'm not sure. Okay, interactive time. Which box of the Bento most interests you? Is it future me, now us, or future us? Where do you think society has the most work to be done? And what do you want to work on? Second question, what was the status of now us and future us in 1920? Yeah, like how are we thinking about now us in 1920? How are we thinking about future us in 1920? Okay, now I want to talk about, instead of talking about the boxes specifically, I want to talk about how certain movements show up within all of the boxes. Kind of like stakeholder capitalism, what we did with that. So one is effective altruism, which I've chatted about a bit, which is, the effective altruist perspective. And again, the whole idea here is that Bentoism is just a map for the territory. It is just a shared language to work across different folks. And something like effective altruism, when the big effective altruist causes are stuff like, with now us, you can say, caring about global health and extreme poverty is a now us cause. It's people saying, okay, we need to care about those 750 million people in extreme poverty. The other one here that I forgot to write is animal cruelty and factory farming. So those 70 billion people or 70 billion animals that killed every year, that's effective altruists caring about now us, where us is defined as animals. Or you can think about future us, and the effective altruist folks think about long-termism and existential risk. That's them really caring about future us and all those future humans. For something like Game B, the main thing that I want to highlight here is that future us for Game B folks is thinking about this meta existential risk and these generator functions of X risk. And how can we make a humanity and a nature and machines that where we set a certain set of ground rules and generator functions that then actually lead to a kind of evolutionary environment where we don't get killed by any exponential curve. For something like social justice activism, well, the now us, they're thinking a lot about folks, historically marginalized groups who haven't really had a voice but can start to express their voice. Something like social justice activism doesn't give as much weight to like someone like the 750 million people in extreme poverty. There's less, or like animal folks, and the 70 billion factory farmed animals. The social justice mindset, which I think is a great mindset, it's a lot about like lived experiences and things like that. And it's hard to understand the lived experience of a chicken. So as social justice activism really focused on, the now us, other groups that have been marginalized, and then future us, these cool visionings of thinking about systemic racism and sexism and imagining kind of the abolition of things like prisons. The other thing that social justice activism does a lot is thinks about past, the past us and the past me. And so thinking about, someone like African Americans in America, it's like we had slavery for a while, and then we had the Jim Crow era, and then we had redlining, and now we have mass incarceration, and all those are bad, evil, racist things. And thinking about what our relationship to those bad things should be, and how to think about affirmative action, and how to think about reparations, and how to think about grief, and how to think about being sad for others and people forgiving us, and how to think about forgiveness. You can also see, this is not a movement, but I think it's worth highlighting, thinking about the Bento with something like COVID is just a helpful perspective. So you could tell when COVID first started, people really thought about their now me and were like, we need toilet paper. They also thought, there's a really sad thing with COVID is that because of the issues with supply chains and all these things, we had 800 million people hungry, and it's probably going to go up to 1.6 billion people hungry as a result. So that's a lot of people's now me needs not being met. A lot of folks also felt their future me meaning that was really hard for them too, where they had all these goals and these plans, and then they all got ruined and changed. And so the future me needs of meaning were then not met. Now we really were reminded of our connection and our networked connection here, that, yeah, we're all connected to each other, and we can give this disease to each other, give this virus to each other. The future us too, we were kind of reminded that, hey, something like flattening the curve is all about future us. It's like, okay, let us stay inside now to make it so that the hospitals are not overwhelmed later. The final thing I want to highlight here is the Sustainable Development Goals and how you can put these into the Bento. And this is SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, and they are what the UN's goals for, I think, 2030. It's like, these are the things that we want by 2030. And you can kind of put them into these buckets. So some of them are just, now me basic needs. It's like no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, clean water for folks, and then, these equalities, gender equality and reduced inequalities. We just want to meet people's now me basic needs. That's what we need to do here. Good food, good water for folks, no poverty. We also need to care about the climate and future us. We need to have clean energy, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, climate action, and then, care about life below water and life on land. These ones could be put into now us as well, as like caring about animals. But in general, you see, boom, let's care about future us. We need to care about the climate and sustainability. There's a couple other ones. The final 5 are, you could put them in a bucket if you wanted to, but they're more about capacity building. So something like quality education, decent work and economic growth, infrastructure, strong institutions, and then partnerships. These are more about, okay, how do we create institutions and economic growth and infrastructure to meet these needs, to meet these other SDGs. And I just want to highlight something here, which is that we're not at the point yet in society where we have any future me needs in the SDGs, right? There's nothing in the SDGs that says, one of our main goals is to give everybody meaning, or to allow everybody to have a deep sense of purpose and an understanding of, their own mastery and all those things. That doesn't exist yet, which is okay. And you can imagine SDGs in the future that both are like, okay, we've now done most of the now me stuff. We've done most of the future us stuff. We're really good. We have a sustainable environment and everybody's needs are met. And now we can focus on this meaning piece for people. Okay. So what does using this Bento language to describe these movements, what does that feel like in your body? I'm feeling okay. I'm mostly just excited when you can have a language that can describe other things. Okay, interactive time. How do some movements that you don't agree with embody the Bento? So something like QAnon, which is a conspiracy theory, weird right-wing group, they believe a bunch of weird things, but the people join them for a reason, right? And so, people are meeting some of their needs for connection and stuff like that in there. So think of that. I think that's an interesting question as well. Okay, let's chat about the personal Bento and how to apply Bentoism to your own life. Again, as a reminder here, Bentoism is a nice thing where it has these multi-scale properties, where at different scales, me and us mean something different. When I'm thinking about it as an individual, me means me, but when I'm thinking of it from a company, me and the now me, means the company. It means profit. So yeah, we can look at this, from a company perspective. We can look at this from a governmental perspective. We won't go too deep into that today, but we can also look at it from an individual perspective. And I just want to note, that looking at it from an individual perspective is just a great way to think about needs. I've done, even pre the Bento coming out, I wrote this article on categorizing needs because there's a bunch of different frameworks and I was trying to understand them with respect to each other. And so I looked at a bunch of them and I got to the conclusion of, okay, they mostly are talking like this. You have these basic survival needs, and then you have these, individual/meaning needs, and then these collective/connection needs. And the nice thing with this is that it's roughly equal to the Bento, which just felt really good. I mean, the Bento is just a better version of this, essentially, where the collective/connection needs are broken out, where you get and this is nice to say that when we think about our own needs, all of the previous frameworks that have existed can be talked about in terms of the Bento, which is nice. So yeah, as a person, as an individual, you can use the Bento to understand your own needs. And I think the beautiful part here is it allows you to exist in a kind of coherent and coherently plural way, and kind of something that feels like more integrity, where you check in with yourself, make sure that you're meeting your basic needs, your needs for meaning, your needs for connection, your needs, helping out with the future us piece as well, and that you can kind of have these different parts speak within you and have, your future me self, your older self say, well, Reese, I think it would be good if you called your mother. Or you can imagine your now us, self, and you can imagine your desire for a need for connection, but also those people on the other end saying, hey, Reese, I'm your dad, I want to talk, or whatever. So it's just a very helpful exercise within yourself to kind of determine what your Bento looks like. What does your now me look like? What does your future me look like? What does your now us and future us look like? I think it's helpful to think of them from this, personified perspective. So yeah, that's what I recommend doing as an individual with the Bento, is you can do this weekly Bento. I've done it myself for a while. You can also join this great crew at bentoism.org and check out, there's like a crew that does these weekly Bentos together. I want to say one final note here on the meaning piece, which is, I think meaning, now me is easy to understand, where kind of your now me needs of like, I gotta drink water. Now us is easy-ish. It's like, okay, make sure your connection, it's hard because you have all these connections with humans and you're both very complex beings, but kind of knowing how to interact there. Future us is kind of easy as well, where you think about, climate change and stuff like that. But I think meaning, this future me meaning, is a little bit difficult. And I just have this helpful framework for me that was a good way for me to think about my own meaning in life. And here's how I think about it. So you take essentially meaning is composed of symbols on top of reality, and these symbols are this clear, important path. So feeling like you're on actually a clear, important path. So something like religion does this by saying, you are God, or God tells me I'm on a clear, important path towards heaven. And you can do this with yourself, though, by just self-generating the clear, important path and saying, I'm going to help as many people as I can. I'm going to do what I can and also enjoy my time and be present with my garden and with others. That's a clear, important path for me. And you then layer that clear, important path on top of an anti-fragile attractor, which is just a type of reality that does not go away too quickly, but also is not infinite. So trying to create meaning over just like drinking water is really hard. It's hard to have like a drinking water God, because it's like too simple and just, goes away. But you can have meaning, and something that's more like random doesn't help either. If I'm just refreshing my computer and getting random colors on like randomcolorgenerator.com, that's hard to, put meaning on top of. But a lot of these things like raising kids or interacting with others or, being present in my garden or whatever, those things are a delightful anti-fragile attractor because you can get into them, and you can also pursue them in a long way with lots of different webs of paths that you can take, and it always will continue, and you can always get value out of it. The other piece here is that a great way to build future me meaning is by helping future us. So thinking about yourself, where your levels are at, how many of your needs are met, and how much can you help others on their path as well. Okay, what does the personal bento feel like in your body? Joy or satisfaction, maybe at peace. Just a thing that's been helpful for me. Okay, interactive time. Make your own bento. Try it out. Where are you succeeding? And where could you use more effort? Like, which of your needs are you neglecting a lot of your now me needs because you're working too hard or whatever? And then second question, where do you find meaning? What's a clear, important path layered on top of an anti-fragile attractor for you? Now, this final piece of today is, why do people do bad things? I don't want to go too deep into this, but I wanted to bring this up as a way for us to understand, okay, is ethics just the answer? Like, if we have this ethical thing, boom, if everybody's a bentoist, then we're all good. And the answer is, it's helpful, but not entirely. Excuse me. So, when we did this, got extreme poverty from almost everyone being in poverty to almost no one, it wasn't, there were other aspects to that transition. And I think that when we think about why, back to this original question of why do people, do bad things? Even if you have the bento mindset, you can come to things like these coordination problems where, and these are perfect examples of it, where it would have been amazing for the United States and Russia to, at the beginning of the Cold War and the beginning of all this, to say, we're just going to not build nukes today. The issue was that they were in a bad game theory problem where if I was the US and you were Russia and I decided not to build nukes and you built more and more nukes, then you could then beat me. And so we had this arms race scenario. And so there are lots of coordination problems where even if everybody's trying to act from their best interest, or even if everybody's trying to be a good person, you can still have a lack of coordination and get into these kind of game theory problems where you just go off the rails. Yeah. Another issue that classically happens for why people do bad things is this Goodhart's law issue, where they're optimizing. At the beginning, they were optimized for the real. Facebook was like, we want to just connect people around the world. But then you get, you go off into this other crazy mode where then you're just optimizing for time on site. And this shows up in a lot of different areas where people are trying, where if people aren't aware enough of checking back with the symbolic to the real and checking in and making sure they're still providing value and meeting human needs, that can be an issue. Another reason why people do bad things is when you're kind of keeping up with the Joneses. So this is a term when you see your neighbor's lawn and it gets green and is awesome and has flowers. And you're like, oh, I need mine to be green and have awesome and have flowers. You essentially have an arms race over having a nice garden. Or in a worse scenario where it's like, oh, they have a really nice sports car. We need a really nice sports car. Well, we have a TV. Now they feel like they need to have a really nice TV. And the reminder here is, and I'll talk about this more in the next section, in the whole next video, is that this is a graph on the right of how happiness changes with income. And the summary of this is that, even though, and these are just 4 different ways to look at happiness, and this is income is doubling, so it's a log graph. Even it's essentially happiness right around $45,000 per year. You totally level out on happiness. And so even if you make more money or on this keeping up with the Joneses, you got to just check yourself and say, wait a second. It was really good for me to try to make more money and to buy my first TV because that did make me happy. But now I need to check back in with, my real to get the signals versus reality and really understand, is this actually making me happy instead of just trying to keep up? The other thing that is a reason why people hurt people is, why people do bad things is because hurt people. If you're in a scarcity, either if you've been hurt in the past, traumatized in childhood, you'll be bad. Or if you have a scarcity mindset and you don't have money, you're going to do things like steal or be bad or all these things. Versus if you have the ability to act from an abundant mindset where more of your needs are met, then you can actively engage in this beautiful way. So scarcity begets scarcity and abundance begets abundance. The other issue is that, folks, it's hard to empathize and we have a lack of empathy. And so, people might not be bad people, but if they don't try to deeply, deeply empathize and relentlessly empathize with as many different folks as they can, then they start to not care about other folks. And in the end, though, I do think, and I am hopeful, and I believe this, that people are good, that we can both set people up for success, and then they will be amazing and be successful, and that people want to do good. They want to meet their own needs. They want to meet the needs of the folks around them, and we're just going to get better and better at having a holistic mindset around ethics and needs. So as I conclude, I want to give this quote from John Maynard Keynes in 1930. He wrote this piece called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where he was kind of talking to our grandchildren, being like, what will economics look like in the future? And what he said was pretty interesting. And this is just a reminder that we can escape from our current moment. What he said was, I draw the conclusion that, assuming no important wars and no important increase in population, the economic problem may be solved, or at least within sight of a solution within 100 years. This means that the economic problem is not, if we look into the future, the permanent problem of the human race. Yeah, we're getting to the point now where a lot of our needs can be met, where, we've done food and we've done goods, and it doesn't need to be a permanent problem for everybody. He goes on to say, when the accumulation of wealth is no longer of high social importance, there will be great changes in the code of morals. We shall be able to rid ourselves of many of the pseudo-moral principles which have hag-ridden us for 200 years, by which we have exalted some of the most distasteful of human qualities into the position of highest virtues. We shall be able to afford to dare to assess the money motive at its true value. The love of money as a possession, as distinguished from the love of money as a means to the enjoyments and realities of life, will be recognized for what it is, a somewhat disgusting morbidity. So what he's saying is, as we mature and as we don't need to just, get wealth, then these things that we've exalted of like, oh man, wealth, so amazing. The love of money as a possession, instead of as a means to an end, we'll be able to see that other thing. They'll just like, you just love money for money's sake. We'll be able to be like, that's bad. We don't want that anymore. He says, all kinds of social customs and economic practices affecting the distribution of wealth and of economic rewards and penalties, which we now maintain at all costs, however distasteful and unjust they may be in themselves, because they are tremendously useful in promoting the accumulation of capital, we shall then be free at last to discard. So we have all these norms and all these practices and stuff where it's like, and it's good because we can then accumulate capital and like make more money and make sure that everybody gets the amount of goods and food that they need. That's fine, but soon we'll be able to discard them. And he says, but beware, the time for all this is not yet. For at least another 100 years, avarice and usury and precaution must be our gods for a little longer still. For only they can lead us out of the tunnel of economic necessity into daylight. So 100 years ago, this wasn't really the case. There were still a lot of people in extreme poverty, but now we can start to zoom out. So that is what we chat about today. Stakeholder capitalism, zooming out from now me to think about those other boxes, how some other movements embody the Bento, using it personally, and then asking a little bit on why people do bad things. In terms of integrating your learning, yeah, you'll start to just look at how companies and how they care about now us and future us, while still balancing that with a now me need. It's like, okay, you want to have this, you want to pay your employees more, that's possible, but maybe, how much are you paying them? Optimize for now us and now me, that's going to be tough. The second thing you'll start to see is you'll just be sad about, signaling good versus doing good, where you're looking in the world and saying, it would be amazing if we were able to always signal our good in an actual legit way. We can't do that always now, where people are signaling and be like, I'm so good. It's like, are you really? And then we'll be excited by some of these tighter couplings that we start to see. The other thing is, just to be aware of our special time. Only in 1970 did we see the Earth. So this is really, we're at the beginning stages, but a prime moment for zooming out. And finally, I do recommend, trying out this weekly Bento for a month. Develop those voices inside yourself. So to conclude, what is the vision of this future? We looked at ethics and, did the intro to Bentoism at the beginning, compared ethics to other stuff like values and morals. We also then looked at the past of ethics and how both as apes and monkeys we became nicer, and then looked at, the history of capitalism and why, the arguments for it before its triumph. And then today we looked at a lot of kind of proto-examples and necessities for why we need to zoom out to future me and now us and future us. And the future vision is that that kind of that Keynesian vision where, for someone like me, my now me needs are met. And we have more and more folks who are getting there. I estimate it's roughly 500 million people who are past that point of, okay, I don't need to just accumulate on myself. I can really start to explore. I can start to give back to others. And as I do that, that helps them, that raises them up. And they then can, do amazing. Instead of being in a scarcity mindset themselves, they are now raised up and can do science and can help with Alzheimer's and these things. And these mindsets will be embodied within ourselves in this way. And also, companies as a thing are going to change a lot. Is the next Airbnb going to have decentralized ownership and governance? Perhaps. Are these new ESGs, as we get better and better at them, is that going to be part of the new accounting statement? Not just on Etsy's accounting statement, but on thousands of companies around the world? And will people be able to talk to each other in this way? Will they be able to recognize their own needs individually and then to check in with each other around, with this shared language? That's what this vision looks like. I hope you're doing well, and I hope that is an inspiring vision, and I believe it to be true. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you so much. If you're excited by this stuff or want to work on helping society zoom out towards future us, check us out at the Root Fellowship at root.co. Thanks and goodbye.